Janet and I have been married for 12 years. We were sweethearts since we were 10 years old and didn't go to college. I got a job as a draftsman at Desmond Engineering right after high school. A year later, we got married, and the following year, we had twin girls, Bethany and Brittany. Despite some initial challenges, we managed to stay afloat financially while I was still a draftsman. I moved up a few grades, which helped us improve our financial situation. We managed to purchase a modest home and own 2 decent cars. They weren't brand new, but they were far from outdated. Janet had fulfilled her dream of being a housewife, and with our financial stability, she didn't need to work. We both remained healthy and fit. Janet had a bit more stature than on our wedding day, standing just over 5 feet 7 inches tall with dark brown hair and bangs resembling little Marie Osmond. Personally, my physique hadn't changed much since my high school football days. Billy Martin moved to Reading from Lancaster about a year ago and started working at Desmond Engineering as a surveyor. Billy and I played football against each other and became friends straight away. He also married his high school sweetheart, a redhead named Sarah. Sarah and Janet hit it off straight away and became like nannies for us when we weren't at work. Bill and I enjoyed their company. It was a nice change of pace from family life. Of course, Janet and Sarah did the same. They went shopping together, attended parties and club meetings, and Billy and I watched the girls on TV. Sarah also took a job as a secretary at Gilbert Engineering, which is located just outside the city. She started about 6 months ago. I've noticed changes in the PTA meeting schedule. It used to be held once a month, but now it is once a week. Sarah, who doesn't have kids, still visited Janet regularly. The number of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties seemed to increase every month, but they never made any purchases. They also joined a book club but never found time to read on weekends. They spent hours shopping but bought very little. Janet's collection of fashionable lingerie grew, but I never got to enjoy any of it. It started bothering me, but I never mentioned anything. I didn't want to cause any problems, but I was starting to worry. About an hour after putting the girls to bed, Janet came home from some kind of basket party. She took a shower before Sarah picked her up and took another one as soon as she got home. This seemed strange to me. While she was in the shower, I quickly checked the basket and found a set of black lace lingerie. Who would wear that? Black lace lingerie to a basket party. I don't usually check my wife's underwear, but I did tonight and found that the underwear were wet and sticky. I put them in my pocket until tonight. I'd never once delved into my wife's purse or wallet. The only thing I was really interested in was her cell phone. Apparently she was pretty sure I wouldn't spy because she hadn't deleted a single call in the last over the course of the week. The majority of calls were addressed to Sarah, but there were also a large number of incoming and outgoing calls addressed to KC, KH, and KW. I had no idea who they were, but I quickly realized that the C stood for sale, the H stood for home, and the W probably stood for work. I checked her address book and saw that Sarah also had 3 numbers listed: Sarah S., Sarah H., and Sarah W. I was amazed at how well organized my wife's phone was. I noticed that the number on Sarah's phone had an extension, so I checked the KW number. It was the same number as Sarah's but with a different extension. It was easy to guess that Janet was calling and receiving calls from someone who worked with Sarah. It was also easy to guess that Sarah must have introduced Janet and the mysterious company, K. Gilbert Engineering. I closed the call and took Janet's phone. I dialed the KWS number and, as I approached Ken Sanders' desk, I heard a recorded message saying he wasn't available. It suggested leaving a name and phone number for a call back after the tone. I ended the call, as it was too easy. Janet poked her head around the doorway and asked if I was going to bed. I told her I was almost done with the book. I got up and finished, then acknowledged the possibility of falling asleep on the sofa. I was going to sleep on the couch. It was a restless night. I kept trying to figure out what I did wrong or what I could have done differently. It was a terrible waste of time and mental effort. Every time I redirected my thoughts to what I should do, they kept coming back to what I should do. I kept looking at the clock. Nothing. I wasn't going to take any blame for what happened or what was going to happen. I woke up to the sounds of my two little angels cooking breakfast. Janet encouraged them to take care of themselves rather than wait. It was a good idea, and it seemed to be working. While stretching and scratching myself, my wife entered the room and mentioned that I should hurry up. I'd better get going if I'm going to make it to work on time. I told her it wasn't a problem as I wasn't going to work that day. When she asked why, I told her it was due to too many personal problems. I went to the bathroom and realized I needed a shower. When I got back, Janet seemed a bit puzzled as the girls had already left for school. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the table opposite my wife, who looked at me hesitantly. As if she knew something I didn't, but wasn't sure what. I asked her to tell me more about her novel. I could tell she might not be ready to talk about it. She asked if I was worried she was cheating on me. I told her I was. I asked her to tell me more about the novel. Even though we've been married for 12 years, she still asked why I was interested in it. I told her I wanted to discuss her novel, citing my work commitments for the day and a refusal to engage in games. My wife let out an exasperated sigh and told me there was no romance in her novel. I sarcastically acknowledged her honesty but said I couldn't appreciate it at the moment. She leaned back, sipping her coffee, as if she'd taken control of the situation. I then asked if she could answer a few simple questions, to which she agreed. I asked her about her frequent attendance at PTA meetings every week, despite the PTA secretary stating they only held monthly meetings and that she hadn't attended one in 6 months. In response, she expressed confusion and a bit less sassiness, claiming she didn't understand what I was implying. I pointed out that she and Sarah attended none. I asked if she could confirm whether there were any PTA meetings on Tuesday. She said there weren't, but then she and Sarah went to Rosie's Cantina for ladies' night instead. I asked why she hadn't informed me, and she said it was to avoid any misunderstandings. She said she'd done the same with Billy and me. She admitted it was a mistake and promised to let us know from now on. I was still a bit unsure, so I said I'd check out her explanation. I suggested Sarah might be able to back her up, but I wasn't sure what Rosie would say. She said I was making a big deal out of it. Then she asked about my behavior at Tupperware parties. She wanted to know why I took a shower before leaving and again when I got home. I explained that I did it to get rid of the smell of smoke on my hair, as a lot of women smoked at those gatherings. She kept asking why I wore fancy underwear to those parties but not for her, unless it was a special occasion. I told her I didn't have a good answer, saying that I just wanted to feel dressed up when I went out. Janet's lies started to annoy me, and I found it difficult to control my anger. I decided it was time to address the situation. I confronted her with the soiled underwear I found the previous night, accusing her of deception. I told her I knew the substance on the underwear wasn't mine and warned her against claiming it was due to a yeast infection. My anger escalated, and I demanded an explanation. Janet fidgeted in her chair, avoiding eye contact, seemingly unable to provide a quick response. I was frustrated. I asked her why she'd come home with soiled underwear and why she'd lied about it. She said she couldn't take it any longer and that we'd been married for 12 years. She asked me how I could treat her like that. I was so angry, I just lost it. I threw my coffee cup across the room, shattering the front of the microwave. This time, Janet was definitely paying attention. She looked shocked, like she'd never seen me angry before. I stood up and confronted her, demanding to know about Ken Sanders. She got up from the chair and went to the sink, trying to avoid the conversation. She kept saying he was just. I kept asking if she was close with him, and she said she was. I asked if they'd slept together the night before, and she said they had. She was really sorry and asked me to stop, and then she started crying at the sink. After I'd poured myself a coffee, I heard Janet's phone ringing, and her eyes shifted nervously. I put the phone between me and Janet and said I'd answer it. I told Ken I'd take a message and put the speakerphone on. Ken said he'd had a call to his work number the night before. Janet seemed really scared. I nodded at her as show I understood. She didn't know what to say to Ken. I told Ken I'd be there in a minute and he should wait there. I told Janet I'd be back later. I said I had things to do in the morning but I'd come by in the afternoon. I suggested putting the emergency number on speed dial. Ken didn't hang up but stayed silent, ending the call. I put the phone in my pocket. Janet was now in her robe and stood at the sink, trembling. I told her I was going to leave. I asked her about the guy Sarah was dating. She said I shouldn't ask. She was upset, so she threw the second cup across the room, and it hit the wall behind the sink. She gave me the name as Kelvin, specifically mentioning Colleen Bostic. She told me she'd be back later in the afternoon and asked me to clear out my belongings before then. She said her mother was staying with the girls temporarily and that she'd help me get any items I couldn't fit in my car. She asked me not to contact her and to let her mother know where I was. She didn't say anything else as I left. I had no idea what to do next. I decided to go into the office and see Billy. I figured he should know what was going on. It was pretty obvious that Sarah met Calvin at work and they became friends. Ken was probably Calvin's friend who needed a date. I probably simplified this a bit, but it was close enough. Billy was away from the office, probably out on a date or something. I called him on his cell and told him about Janet and Sarah's boyfriends. I also told him that he was pretty skeptical about the supposed meetings and Tupperware parties being social gatherings. I suggested asking Sarah about a guy named Calvin Bosk who worked with her and Gilbert, as I suspected she might have introduced Janet to someone from their workplace. Billy was pretty surprised when I told him about Cal and Bosk, as they had graduated together. I also mentioned a guy named Ken Sanders, describing him as a tall, skinny individual. I shared my belief that Janet would. I figured Sarah would probably warn her soon, so I went to HR to request a short leave. I couldn't focus on work, so I transferred my tasks to another draftsman in just 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Janet's phone rang with Sarah's name on the call. Idaho. I answered it and pretended to be Janet. I asked about the situation and Sarah apologized, thinking she was calling Janet. She mentioned that Billy had received information at the office. I was really angry and disgusted. I asked Sarah to explain what someone had said to Billy. She told me that she'd planned to take Janet home and that it wasn't a good idea to bother her at that moment because she was busy packing her things. I was really surprised, so I asked why she was packing. I learned that Janet was planning to move back in with her parents for a while to give her some space. I could imagine what was going through Sarah's mind. I told her to let Calvin know about. I told Sarah that Billy was on his way and that he might appreciate a head start. She was shocked and disbelieving, saying, "No, God no," before hanging up. We only had one credit card, so canceling it was no problem. We also had an ATM or a debit card. It took me 5 minutes to change the PIN number. I had no idea what to do with the checking account, so I just ignored it for now. In any case, I needed it to pay utilities and other bills. I just hoped Janet didn't take any receipts with her. The cell phone rang again, but this time it was my phone. Billy chased Calvin Bostic out of the Gilbert building and caught him in the car park. He was in jail and wanted me to tell his brother from Lancaster to come and post bail for him. I called his brother. I couldn't do anything more for Billy, so after lunch I went to Taco Bell. I visited my mom and dad and explained everything to them. Mom was happy to watch the girls for a while. She stayed with me during the week and the twins stayed with them at the weekends. Now it's time to visit. Ken Sanders, the guys in Gilbert's drafting department, were keen to tell me about Billy's visit that morning. The drafting department overlooks the parking lot and they saw everything that happened. Billy caught Calvin before he could get to his BMW and threw him over the hood of one of the cars and started smashing his face. The guards followed them and tried to get Billy out, but they weren't successful. Finally, one of them punched Billy in the neck with a stun weapon. He wasn't home yet when they put him in the police car, so they had to take him in. Calvin ended up in the ambulance. One of the guys showed me the office where Ken Sanders worked. It was empty. It looks like old Ken suddenly quit this morning. We walked past Sarah's desk. She wasn't there, but it looked like she was still working there. 10 minutes later, I found out Ken's home address and headed to the parking lot. It was a small ranch with no garage. There was a white Lexus in the driveway with the trunk and back doors open. As I approached the door, Ken Sanders came out with an armful of clothes. He dropped everything and he rushed back into the house as soon as he saw me. I tripped over the things he dropped and saw him leave out the back as I came in. I couldn't help but laugh at his reaction. I wasn't like Billy. I was a good guy. It looked like the kind of place that would be rented fully furnished. That's why he'd finished in another 10 minutes and left town. I was looking forward to talking to Ken, but I didn't want to chase him. I looked around the room for anything interesting and found a few pleasant surprises. The first thing I picked up was his mobile phone, which was lying on the table in the living room next to a folder containing his passport and some personal documents. There was also a small laptop computer on the dining table. I couldn't find anything else, so I packed up the few items I had and left. I didn't want to do anything that could be considered criminal, so I resisted the urge to break into his car. This place was beautiful. I believe it might be considered a crime to take items from the house, but he left the door open and anyone could. I couldn't resist taking them. I couldn't restrain myself entirely, so I let the air out of just one of his tires. He'd need to empty the truck to access the spare tire, and I'm sure he'd do it with one eye on the street, searching for me. I'll retrieve it later. He got the message. I went to the prison to see Billy, his brother. He was occupied with legal matters, so I just waved and smiled at him. It seemed like he had everything under control. Mom was already at home, and dinner had started. We chatted briefly, and then I brought the things I bought. I went to the office to check my computer and other belongings. Beth and Britt were back from school, so I told them what was going on. I didn't get a chance to explain to Bethany why her grandmother was there. She asked where her mom was and I told her that her mom and I had decided to take a break. She seemed happy about it. In a bet with Bethany, she gloated about winning and explained that their argument revolved around Mom cheating on me. However, Bethany denied ever mentioning anything about Mom cheating, asserting that they were not naive and knew what was happening. She admitted that Brittany was right and that Mom was indeed cheating on me, expressing surprise at how I found out. She then criticized me for being slow and trusting Brittany in an unusual gesture, attempting to console me. The situation was surreal. On a Saturday, when my mom and Sarah said they were going shopping at King of Prussia, my mom wouldn't let Brittany go with her. She said it was an adult shopping day and she would make it up to us later when we got to school on Monday. 2 kids said they saw her with a guy in Nobles Grove. We called them liars, but one of the girls had a photo on her cell phone, which seemed pretty trivial at the time. I thought there must be an explanation, but Britt said she was cheating. Why didn't you tell me anything? A couple of weeks later, Tracy Mercer's parents saw Sarah's mom and 2 guys at TGI Fridays in Allentown. They told Tracy about it when they got home. I was pretty shocked, to be honest. Thankfully, Grandma invited us to dinner. We didn't bring it up at dinner, and I apologized before dessert arrived. Luckily, the twins decided to leave the topic for the rest of the night. I just started looking at Ken's laptop when his phone got a text. It said, Dax 4 Synth YJ Dear Ken, sorry for the love, Janet. I'm not the best at texting, but I easily made out this message. It said, it was sent from Sarah's phone, so I figured they were together. I couldn't resist letting Janet know I had Ken's phone, so I spelled out TJ. I spent the next couple of hours looking at files and folders on Ken's computer. I didn't find any emails between Janet and Ken, but there were some interesting ones between Ken and some old friends. I was shocked by what I read and didn't appreciate it. Janet and I had been together for almost our entire lives, and now I discovered that I never really knew her in less than a year. She seemed to have become closer to Ken than she had with me in almost 20 years. As I replaced the cartridge in the printer, I noticed tears streaming down my face. I didn't usually react like this. I'd been lied to and it hurt. Perhaps because of my tears, I printed out several emails and a dozen photographs. I would have taken more photos, but I ran out of expensive paper. There were no explicit or suggestive images. All of them were suitable for mixed company. Beth poked her nose in the door and asked if she could. I called her mother. I didn't feel like I could refuse. My mother was with the twins while they talked to Janet, and she overheard everything. She didn't eavesdrop, but it seemed like the girls weren't trying to hide anything. Mom later told me that they didn't cut Janet any slack and blamed her for the whole problem. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. The emails were extremely. Ken got hired as an engineer for an alternative energy project in Spain. His start date was in 6 weeks. It seems he didn't tell Gilbert about his departure. I'm sure Sarah knew, but no one else mentioned it. He had all the documents ready for the trip except for my passport. I'm sure he could find a replacement, but he better hurry if he wants to set a start date. I suppose he could always go to the police and report that I stole it, but I didn't think he would do that. He still hasn't booked his plane tickets. One of the letters to a close friend explained a lot. Janet planned to get a divorce after joining Ken in Spain. She realized that I would never allow her to take the girls out of the country, so she was going to declare me unfit. Father, the letter didn't go into detail about how she was going to achieve this, but it did indicate that it would be severe enough to revoke my visitation rights for the twins or custody. It was completely despicable. Ken wrote this letter, so it was all hearsay. I would have liked to have received something original from Janet, but I had to make do with what I had. I printed out several copies. I got copies of this letter. My mom was watching Leno, so I sent her to bed. The girls had already gone to bed. I fell asleep on the couch and there were 4 empty beer bottles on the coffee table. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. My mom always prepared a good breakfast. The girls were finishing their cereal when I approached the table. I had to endure some good-natured teasing before I could start cooking the eggs. I was teased a bit before I started cooking the eggs. The conversation was casual until it was time for the bus. I told the girls that their mother might try to separate us by saying that I was an unfit parent so that she could keep custody of them. I said that I was open to shared custody, for I told them I'd do everything I could to make sure they were happy, but that I wouldn't give up my right to be with them. I asked them not to choose sides, but to be careful and not believe anything that wasn't true. Brittany said they were cleverer than I thought and that they loved their mom, but they wouldn't let her hurt me. She smiled, and Beth gave me a thumbs up. After they left, my mom refilled my cup and joined me at the table. She encouraged me to relax, assuring me that everyone was on my side. After a shower and shave, I dressed slightly nicer than usual. It felt a bit strange leaving the house with 3 mobile phones, so I made a mental note to get the. I also took the cell phone charger that Ken had given me, even though I probably wouldn't need it. I figured it was better to be prepared. Then I checked in at the family services office and waited for the caseworkers to call. When they did, I was surprised to see Jod Mitchell, who'd helped me a long time ago. She remembered me from our shared high school days, when she was part of the goth group that stuck together, facing ostracization, particularly from athletes like me. She looked normal now, but I couldn't forget her pink hair, black lipstick, and dark eye makeup, as well as the sign on her desk. I saw J. Mitchell, which made me think she hadn't married 12 years ago. I could understand it, but today she looked normal. "John, what can I do for you?" Her question interrupted my train of thought. I stuttered a bit and said I'd noticed Jody's appearance, which made her laugh at my awkwardness. I apologized if my words had been. She told me I was embarrassing myself and reassured me to relax. She shared that halfway through college she realized she could face the world authentically without a false facade. Jod mentioned she had been what I might call normal for almost a decade now, feeling much more comfortable this way. However, she acknowledged sounding patronizing. Sometimes she apologized for saying the wrong thing. I asked Jod if there were any files or reports on me. She said there was nothing under my name or Janet's. It seemed we were providing for our children rather than mistreating them. I confirmed that I had been there for 12 years. I told her about my twin daughters, Bethany and Brittany. I said that my wife was planning to leave me and take the girls with her. Jod said that she understood and asked if there was a reason for my wife's actions. I told her that there were no documents or accusations in the girls' records that raised concerns about potential setups. Jod said that just because their computer didn't show anything, it didn't mean I was in the clear. She suggested that my wife might be gathering information like medical records, or I asked Jod to look at some police reports before we went to their office. I was still a bit unsure about being set up, so I asked her to explain why she thought my wife would do such a thing. I also showed her an email from Ken. I had taken it from a computer through illegal access, so I wanted to know where it came from. I mentioned the word conspiracy without really understanding what it meant legally. I told her I was confused and worried about how to protect myself and my daughters, especially since I couldn't afford a lawyer. Mitch relaxed in her chair and kept eye contact with me. She rocked back and forth before leaning towards me and suggesting I come back the next morning. I agreed and asked if I could keep the copy of the letter after receiving confirmation. I left and she said goodbye, expressing that it was nice to see me. I smiled and she returned the gesture, revealing a new side of Jody. I hired a lawyer from the phone book, even though I knew my wife was planning to divorce me. I wanted to secure my position given the circumstances. I wasn't sure about our financial situation in the coming days, so I paid the lawyer up front in cash for the entire package. I told him to proceed as quickly and easily as possible, allowing her to have the house as it was worth less than the mortgage. I insisted on joint custody of the twins with the possibility of taking full custody in the future and agreed to pay child support, but not alimony. Alimony Billy called me on my way to lunch to ask about housing. I offered to help. We met at Taco Bell for lunch. When I approached, Billy had a silly smile on his face. I was curious, so I asked why he was happy. Billy told me that a friend at Community General Hospital had told him about Calvin. Sarah had visited Calvin at the hospital, unaware of Calvin's wife and children. The situation became chaotic, and hospital security had to escort Sarah out. Billy walked past Gilbert to talk to her, but he found that I asked about the details of Calvin's family situation and Billy admitted he didn't know why Calvin's wife didn't live with him or why he didn't go home to his family on weekends. He said he wasn't interested in these details. Billy decided to take a week off from work to sort out his affairs. We planned to figure out his accommodation since my mother also lived at home. Billy intended to go to his house to gather some clothes and personal belongings in case Sarah wasn't there. He said he had no intention of talking to her anymore. Later on, I got another call from Cameron Wilcox, Janet's father. He asked me to come to the meeting to help figure things out. He mentioned that Janet was feeling despair and that her mother wasn't being very helpful. The meeting would include Cameron, Janet, Janet's sister Carla and myself. I wasn't sure what the meeting was about, but I said I'd be there in about 20 minutes. It was a pretty serious gathering. I brought a folder of evidence and skipped the coffee. Who wants to start? John, Janet says you're overreacting. She says you were angry and forced her into. She said some things that weren't true to make you feel better. She thinks she did nothing wrong and you have no right to evict her. I could tell that my wife was making things up to her parents, but I understood why she didn't want to admit she was unfaithful. I didn't like that she was blaming me. Cameron said he wanted to know the facts to understand the situation better and asked what I wanted him to do to prove she was lying. I had to decide whether to believe her or admit I made a mistake. I told Cameron that Janet said she didn't have a boyfriend, but she'd actually been drinking with friends from Sarah's workplace. I also mentioned that she'd had over 80 phone conversations with this friend in the last month. I asked Cameron and her mother how often she'd been calling them. They both turned to Janet, who avoided eye contact. I then brought up Ken's cell phone. When no one spoke, I asked Carla to read a text message Ken had sent right after I asked Janet to leave. It was an apology for the trouble and a love message. Janet covered her face with her hands and Cameron shook his head slowly. I shared photos from an outing Janet and Sarah said was at King of Prussia Mall but was actually at Nebel Grove. Cameron questioned Janet about the hand-holding in the photos, suggesting, I could see that Ken was more than just a friend. Tears were flowing slowly as this unexpected outcome unfolded. I showed more photos, which I'd taken at Olive Garden and Red Lobster. I mentioned the stains on Janet's underwear, but decided not to discuss them at that moment. Cameron apologized for calling me in for such a situation. He was upset at being tricked and shook my hand as I left. Janet left the room sobbing like a child, and there was no discussion about the stains on her underwear at that time. Cameron assured me that the situation wouldn't be ignored. When I got home, my mom and Billy had already set up a fold-out bed in the living room. It wasn't a hallway, just a small extra room where I kept my computer. Billy had a pile of extra clothes in the corner that he had taken from home. Sarah wasn't home when he arrived. The most interesting thing waiting for me was the mail, but it wasn't for me. It was for Janet. A beautiful official envelope from the passport department. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't help myself. It was, of course, a passport. More precisely, it was a family passport. The photo featured Janet and the two girls. I remember the girls mentioning getting their picture taken, but I never imagined it was for that purpose. The passport wasn't in the envelope, so I called Cameron and asked him to tell Janet the goods had arrived. If she needed a passport, all she had to do was send Ken home to pick it up. I would only give it to Ken. I was usually at work when the letter arrived, so I would never have known she received it. Cameron told me they had asked Janet to find another place to live and they had no idea where she was going. It seemed like he was a little angry with their daughter. He promised to let her know about the passport. The dinner conversation mainly revolved around the girls. Bethany, with a shy smile, mentioned that a woman from family services named Jody had visited their school and talked to both of them together. They missed gym and geography due to the lengthy conversation. Beth and Britt expressed that Jod seemed to like me, though it was just from a one. We had a long chat over dinner. Carla called me while I was eating and wanted to talk. We met at McDonald's, where she explained Janet's situation. Carla said she had doubts about my ability to answer questions, which I agreed with. She started by blaming Sarah for everything. She said that Sarah's affair with Billy was thrilling and romantic to Janet. Janet said that she and I had a loving and reliable relationship, but it was lacking excitement and romance. Janet got involved with Ken Sanders when he joined Gilbert, while Sarah and Calvin had loved Janet and Ken were left alone, which led to a full-blown. The affair was over, but she couldn't or wouldn't end it. Ken had captured her imagination with stories of his achievements and had proposed a trip to Spain, which she had eagerly accepted. The real issue for Janet wasn't leaving me but leaving the girls. She knew I would never allow her to take them abroad, so she planned to find a way to make me. Carla explained that after talking with the girls, Janet realized they were closer to me than to her. As a result, she decided not to pursue custody. If I agreed to a divorce without any conditions, I agreed to proceed without contesting it. Carla then mentioned that Janet would like to get her passport and asked if I had it with this. It made me think that Janet might still want to take the girls with her. The family passport was important in this. Carla, my coffee is cold. I'm going to go home and take a hot shower. Don't call me anymore, John. What's wrong? How did you know it makes you angry? You really think I'm that stupid? Go back to your sister and tell her there is no way she can have my daughters. She can't have them. Help her. I'll have to ask you never to talk to my girls again. Carla was talking on her cell phone as I left Mickey D's. I can only guess who she was calling. I got to the family services office before it opened. You couldn't stay away from me, could you? Jod walked into the office with a big smile on her face and a Starbucks cup in her hand. She motioned for me to sit down and apologized for not having more coffee. I think you know that I talked to your daughters. Yesterday, I nodded and smiled, but I was a little tongue-tied and out of my element. I remembered that the same thing happened the last time I talked to her, since I was with Janet my whole life. I never had the chance to develop any social skills with other women, and it seems like I've paid for it now. I'm sorry, John. Forget I said that. I wasn't trying to be smart. I just couldn't find the right words. I'm really sorry, Jod. I think I'd better leave. I didn't know about all this morning. I'll call you later before you go. I want you to know that I'm getting a restraining order against your wife. I can't stop her from seeing, or I can stop her from taking them out of state or denying you access to them. It will be delivered to her before noon." I was really happy about this, but I left the office anyway. I went to the nearest Starbucks. The coffee smelled good. Everything was under control until today. I was feeling pretty disheartened and bewildered, so I decided to drive around aimlessly for a while before heading home. Billy told me that Sarah had relocated to her parents' house near AFA, so he was only going to be back at his place until he could sell or rent it out. He spent the morning at the bank, the insurance company, and the law office, hoping to secure some money from Gilbert. Unfortunately, they didn't have a company policy against fraternization, which made his efforts a bit of an uphill battle. His lawyer explained that he'd had better luck passing by the hospital, where he discovered Calvin was being discharged. Calvin's wife was in the process of completing her discharge paperwork when Billy stopped by to express his gratitude for his help in explaining her attempt to persuade Calvin to drop the charges. She revealed that she had been trying to improve the situation with Calvin for several years without success. After Billy left, I sat on the porch nursing a beer. My mom brought me a meatloaf sandwich and joined me in silence, sharing the beer she had just finished. Dad said he'd come for dinner and stay the night when Jod Mitchell arrived. Mom went inside, and Jod sat with me, turning down the beer I offered. We sat in silence for a few minutes before she spoke. "I served Janet's papers about an hour ago. She was upset, staying with her sister." I finished. "The long neck I was holding may seem good, but why do I feel so bad in such situations?" "There's nothing good, John, just less bad." I pulled out another beer, hesitated, and returned it to the refrigerator. "Could you come in and explain all this to the girls? I get along with them, but no matter how carefully I phrase it, I don't want to blame their mother, but I'm worried it might push them away. How about 7 tonight?" I nodded and she stood up, walking to her car. She looked back halfway there, which was a positive sign, and I smiled. She smiled back. Jod visited that evening and spent considerable time with Beth and Britt. Billy and I busied ourselves searching his house. He started coming over to our house a few times a week, spending as much time with my mom as with the girls. I noticed she was avoiding me, which suited me fine. One evening after the girls had gone to bed, she sat beside me. I felt like I needed to talk to her. She started the conversation by asking if I had any wine, preferably with a cork. I told her that I had wine, but that it all had screw caps. She found this amusing and asked for something red, so I poured a bottle into a container that looked more like a jug as we drank. I finally gathered the courage to discuss the girls. During her visits, she said the twins were fine and didn't need to see her. I was surprised when she said she'd come to see me, not the girls. She rarely talked during her visits, so I asked why. She said she thought I might have a rule against seeing clients. We laughed about it to break the ice. She then brought up tattoos and said I was surprised that I hadn't asked to see hers. I told her that I had, though, for tattoos from my high school days, 3 of which were easily visible and 1 more discreet. She playfully suggested a game of finding the tattoos, maintaining quiet to avoid waking the girls. The 4th tattoo was in a secluded place, and I admired it for a while before she left. I sensed that they might be aware of what occurred, though. I was aware of what had happened. I'd asked my lawyer to finalize and deliver the divorce papers. Janet, who was still living with Carla, received the papers but didn't respond. Several more weeks passed and my father's health declined. Mom spent more time with him than with me. Luckily, school finished and the girls spent the summer with her. By the end of summer, Dad had moved to a nursing home. At home, Billy and I helped Mom get the family home ready to sell, and she moved back in with me. Jod visited the girls at their mother's all summer and spent 3 or 4 evenings a week with me. They went shopping and out to dinner together, and I was grateful for the attention Brittany and Bethany were giving. I didn't envy them anymore. I was pretty sure they knew what was going on between Jod and Janet. Called the girls about once a week, but the conversations were always short. She said the twins seemed tense most of the time, but I didn't notice. I didn't know about Billy's divorce from Sarah until he told me. He also wanted to start his own surveying business and asked me to come with him. I didn't have enough money to contribute until my mom, she and her father ran out of money, so Medicare picked up his expenses instead of letting it all disappear. She thought I should use it for business. I believe she also thought of it as an investment in her future. 3 months later, Billy and I had our own small surveying business. Fortunately, my drawing skills developed into drawing stories about a week into the new semester. The twins were their mom came to visit and they thought they'd go to the guidance office to see Jody. They were disappointed to see Janet. They tried to be polite and respectful, but it didn't work. She told them she loved them both and was sorry things turned out the way they did. She was going to Spain to see the windmills and would send them some postcards. She promised to call them every day. She sent them a card on their birthday and gave them some great Christmas gifts. When she left, she didn't call to say goodbye. The next week, her parents turned up at the house. They apologized again for what she did, but they didn't defend her or try to justify her actions. Brittany and Bethany were their only grandchildren, and they wanted to see them. I wasn't in a position to help. They said Carla felt too ashamed to approach me. Torn between her sister and her parents, 2 months later my divorce was officially concluded. Jod and I opted to celebrate at Red Lobster. It was a rare even evening without the girls, who seemed content. In fact, I believe they were somewhat elated. We spent the night at a local Holiday Inn. The twins welcomed me back with delight at 10. The following morning, though they didn't say so, they were smiling from ear to ear all day. A year later, everything was going well, but unfortunately my father passed away. My mother was thinking of moving to Florida with her sister, but she didn't want to leave the girls. The twins thought their grandmother should move in, but they wanted Jod to take her place even if she couldn't cook as well as my mother. They also said they were old enough to have separate rooms. The girls got birthday cards from their mom, but there was no phone call. She also sent loads of postcards with Spanish windmills on them. I wasn't sure what they were for. She sent 2 really stylish embroidered dresses, even though she didn't realize the girls were entering their teens and might get bigger. They didn't mind that the dresses were too small. Gilbert Engineering became our main client. Billy was pleased to find out that Calvin was now teaching electronics at Lebanon County Vocational School. He was no longer married and Sarah remarried and relocated to California. Ken Sanders didn't last 6 months in his new job. He's now working in the States, but his whereabouts remain unknown. Billy sought information through his high school's alumni association. My best friend always believed I got away with Ken too easily. Strangely, the girls continued to receive postcards featuring windmills with I got some specific info, but it was mostly just general sentiments. Cameron told me that Janet called them a few times from her job at a travel agency in Barcelona. She never mentioned Ken or shared any details about their past. I got married quietly in Maryland a year later. She was expecting, and Brittany and Beth were as thrilled as we were. They were excited to have a goth sister and a private joke that they never let me in on. I still didn't know what the deal was with the Spanish windmills.